Food and Wine Insider is a weekly look at a $1.5 trillion industry touching every American. Visit us at foodandwineinsider.com.
And Americans love their whiskey, but how much do they know about the spirits they drink? At the recent book expo, I ran across Carlo Devito's new book, Big Whiskey. He's here today to talk about his exciting tome and an industry we use but know very little about. Carlo, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you both having me on. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, first off, I'm going to turn it over to Ann. She's got all the good questions.
Well, thank you, Don, and welcome, Carlo, to Food and Wine Insider. I'm not really sure where to start. You own a winery, the Hudson Chatham Winery in Ghent, New York. You've written a book on the wineries of the East. You've also written books about some really dear people like Phil Rizzuto and Yogi Berra, and you edited On the Shoulder of Giants by Stephen Hawking. I think I love most that you wrote a book on The Godfather, classic quotes. I thought that was really fabulous.
Probably my bestseller to date, I can't lie.
Now you've written a new book named Big Whiskey. Before we get into your latest book, it's clear that you've had a lot of distinct passions. What drives you?
Oh, I mean, I really enjoy the genre. Originally, I was interested in wine, and I've traveled all over the world following my passion for wine. I've been up and down to most of the regions of California. I've been to Spain, Italy, France, Chile, up and down the East Coast, Canada. I'm just one of those nut jobs, dude. There's never anything other than a busted holiday. And I started getting into whiskey. I edit wine, beers, and spirits books, which is not one of the worst jobs you can have. And I slowly got into beer and then into whiskey. And the previous book I had done, which was called The New Single Malt, was a fascinating education because now there are 27 countries around the world that are producing single malt. We tend to only think of Scotland as doing that. And with all that, one of the things that really interested me was all the activity that was going on down in Kentucky and Tennessee, which has just been a magnet for innovation and for investment, and it's exploded down there.
Yeah, I was when I saw it, and unfortunately I didn't have time to read the book. But as you're talking about the book, I was thinking about, wow, there's all this sort of wine and there's craft beers. Do you think there's a craft whiskey movement out there, or has it already been there? Because I guess there's still a lot of moonshiners, but there's a lot of confusion about it.
Yeah, it's been building immeasurably and in a number of different ways. Originally, the craft spirit, craft distilling movement really began outside of Tennessee and Kentucky. And you saw places on the West Coast, and you saw places in New York who were really pushing the envelope. One of the most famous of which would have been the Baby Hudson Bourbon, Baby Hudson Rye. It was Tuttletown who brought back a lot of spirits that people weren't doing, and then you had other distilleries doing the same, and the mixologists, where craft cocktails were becoming a bigger and bigger thing, were embracing some of these new innovations that were coming out, or rebirth of spirits that seemed to have dropped off the face of the earth. For example, rye. 7 years ago, maybe there were a half dozen ryes out there. Now every major brand has a rye. And so whiskey had fallen completely out of favor till about 7 or 8 years ago. Gin, tequila, vodka were all the rage, the clear spirits. And whiskey has made an incredible comeback. You've seen it in Scotland with the single malt whiskey producers, and now you're seeing it in the United States with both the craft distillers and then a lot of the big distillers from the region that we're talking about.
So, and I think our listeners would like to know this. So, what is whiskey, and how is it different from bourbon? If I've read things correctly, bourbon has to be made in America, but Can you help people understand the difference?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Whiskey is to the spirits category what beer is to that category. It's the generic term. A bourbon can be a whiskey, but a whiskey isn't necessarily a bourbon. It's the sort of general rubric for the group. So here's how it breaks down. Moonshine, and I'm going to break it all the way down to moonshine for everybody who's listening. So moonshine is mostly made out of sugar. It may have some other ingredients in it, but moonshine is made out of sugar. Then you can get what's called cane and corn, which has some amount of corn in your moonshine. And then you have corn whiskey. And that can also be referred to as moonshine, which is the generic term for that clear spirit. But what white whiskey is it's probably something that's going to be aged in oak at one point or another, and a distiller needs to make money while he's waiting for that stuff to turn to brown spirit. So he sells that white whiskey off as moonshine. That's really how the whole moonshine craze really started to take off, as new craft distillers needed to sell something while they were aging the rest of their stores. So that's the white category, and then you get into the brown stuff. So anything that's aged in oak can be called a whiskey. Oh, not everything, but most things. Most whiskey is made from grain. So your four main grains are corn, rye, wheat, and malted barley. And depending on which whiskey you're drinking, the mash bill, which is the recipe, changes from manufacturer to manufacturer. And the difference between bourbon and rye is that bourbon has to be 51% corn and rye has to be 51% rye. Bourbon has a few extra steps. It has to be aged in a new oak barrel, a charred oak barrel, and to be called straight Kentucky bourbon, it has to be a minimum of 2 years.
And is there, as the product ages, what happens to the alcohol content?
Well, the alcohol content, believe it or not, actually goes up. So what happens is, as the barrels age in what is called a rick house or a warehouse, these huge buildings, which are built by in Kentucky, they're built almost only by one builder, which is called Buzik, and they build these anywhere from 30 to 70,000 barrel warehouses, and they build them practically overnight. It's an amazing thing to see. What happens is you start to get the angel's share, meaning that through osmosis, the liquid starts to escape the barrel. But in alcohol, the barrels are stoppered up so tightly that the alcohol increases by volume as the volume decreases. So as you're losing liquid, you're really losing water. The alcohol is staying inside the barrel. So a barrel proof of an 8-year-old barrel could be anywhere, 95 to 100. And that's when you get those cask strength whiskeys that people are so fond of. But the longer it sits in there, you tend to start to see higher and higher alcohol.
Yeah. So what was the most interesting thing you learned in studying whiskey? And I'm just curious, why is the book called Big Whiskey?
Okay, so it's called Big Whiskey for a reason. The idea was that I wanted to concentrate only on Kentucky and Tennessee, which is the largest single region of distillers in North America. There are some wonderful hot spots. California, New York especially, have some tremendous places. Texas has somebody like Sip Kate, who made Balcones a household name. But by and large, the premier distilling region in the United States is Tennessee and Kentucky, or Kentucky and Tennessee. And what's going on right now in that region is just incredible. You're talking about, just to give you an idea, right now we are only drinking half the amount of brown spirits that our grandfathers drank 40 and 50 years ago. But there's twice as many people, and the rage for brown spirits seems to be unquenchable right now. So what you're seeing is a massive retrenching of a major industry in the United States. Buzik, which builds these massive warehouses, has years worth of orders that they're trying to fill. Vendome, who is the premier maker of distilling apparatuses, stills, etc. They're having a decade and a half like never before. So what's happening is in the region you're seeing a massive retooling. What they've brought back almost a half a dozen of old distilleries that have been shut down for years, and you're seeing them just cranking up, trying to catch up to the thirst that's happening for brown spirits. Just to give you an idea, I went to Jack Daniels. I spent a day at Jack Daniels with the master distiller there, and they had $100 million makeover. Not one dime went to the tasting room. It all went into production and warehousing, so you can catch up with what they expect the demands are going to be over the next 5 to 7 years. And that's not unusual. Four Roses had a $67 or $70 million makeover. You're seeing new investments in other distilleries, new distilleries going up. There's just not enough brown whiskey to satisfy the marketplace at this time.
Wow. John, I wanted to give you a chance to ask a question. Do you have a question for Carlo?
Oh yes, I do. My mother was the original prohibitionist, and hence I've never learned to drink. But my question, I guess, is it seems to me that Americans seem to be into fads, into trends. When I was a young reporter, vodka was the big thing. Then double malt became big, the trendy drink. Then daiquiris, etc. Carlo, what is the trend today? I know you talked about various things, but is consumption of whiskey a trendy type of environment?
Oh, absolutely. And you've seen a lot of reinvention of the category due to two influences. One, going back to the question that Ann asked earlier, a lot of the craft distillers brought a whole bunch of new techniques to the game that both Scotland and Kentucky started to emulate. So, for example, and some of it actually started in Scotland years before. So, for example, you have a bourbon now, for example, Angel's Envy, that's finished in port casks. Or you'll see bourbons finished in sherry casks or Chardonnay casks, like Woodford has done. There's all these new finishes, and now you've got barrel, you've got single barrel, you've got cask strength. All these things were reintroduced by both Scotland and the craft distillers, and it's really pushed the whole industry. The other side of it is that there's been a whole new category ripping a page out of the vodka craze and imposing it on the whiskey craze. So now you've got Fireball and you've got honey flavors, etc., that have been a great entree for younger drinkers, not meaning underage people, but people in their early 20s who aren't accustomed to whiskey, and it's made, they've got some flavored and sweeter versions that make for a great gateway beverage that will eventually get them into the more superior products. And so there's a lot of great things going on, and the industry's exploded in other ways too. I mean, you're seeing women master distillers, and there are some great stories that have evolved. Nearest Green, it turns out, was who was an ex-slave, was the man who actually came up with the recipe for Jack Daniels. You've got the history of the Johnson family at Buffalo Trace, 3 generations of an African-American family, and they were actually absolutely imperative to the growth of that distillery. So you've got wonderful stories that are coming out, plus you've got all kinds of small craft distillers that are popping up throughout the region. Tennessee, for example, 7 years ago, or 8 years ago, I forget what it was, 2009, so maybe it was 9 years ago, they only had 3 distilleries in the entire state. Now there are more than 40. So you're seeing a huge, huge explosion. You're seeing great distilleries like Nashville Craft, or there's a place called Corsair, where there are just these huge incubators for new styles and real great innovations that are being made. And you see some great places. One of my favorites, Tennessee, there's a guy, it's called H. Clark, and he's the only distillery that also houses a lawyer's office, because he is a practicing lawyer, and his office is inside the distillery. So his clients have to go inside the distillery to go meet with their lawyer. So some fascinating stories as you go through.
Yes, but I guess my question, and I'll turn it back to Ann, is what is driving these trendy things? Is the fact that more women are drinking openly than what? I'm reviewing the Mad Men series on rerun, and the different mores in those days of the 50s and 60s in terms of women drinking and how women drink today. What are the trends that seem to make this year's popular drink passé by next year?
Well, that relies on a series of things, and I don't think that the whiskey trend that you're seeing is as new as maybe you think it is, because it's been building now for about 7 or 8 years. It's been a slow burn. It hasn't just jumped up. I think what's the thing is, it's now sort of hitting popular culture is really where it's at. Yes, I agree that there are drinks that seem to drive an industry. For example, the Cosmo was very big for a while, and then you saw mojitos were very big for a while, and Negronis were very hot for a while. Mixologists have to constantly be revising their menus to attract customers, or to keep customers coming back for something new and different. That's a mixologist's job. But a distiller's job is to, when you're talking to a distillery, for example, again, I'm going to reference Jack Daniels. He said he was going to a sales meeting to get forecasts. And I said, well, it's a little late for next year. He said, next year? He goes, we're looking at 5-7 years out. He goes, for next year, they're screwed. They have what they have, and that's all there is to it. These are issues that they have to contend with. Whiskey isn't something you make overnight. It's something that takes anywhere from 2 to 8 years to get quality whiskey. Why are people drinking more whiskey? Because it has become more popular. No question, mixologists did drive people to it. Rebirths of things like the Manhattan, the Rob Roy, Old Fashions have completely come back into vogue. Drinks that people weren't having 7-8 years ago. They just weren't in the numbers that they are now. The other thing, as I said earlier, there's been a gateway beverage like the honeyed whiskeys and the fireballs that are made with cinnamon flavored, that are attracting younger drinkers, and then eventually they're turned into bourbon or whiskey drinkers or rye drinkers. And that's been the sort of gateway product that leads them into the larger family of higher quality products.
I have a lot more, but back to you, Ann.
Oh, thank you, Don. I want people to know you live on a farm, you have your own winery. But it's interesting. I usually come across folks, either they like wine or they like hard liquor, but they don't drink both. How is it that you have a passion for both?
No, I actually have a passion for beer too. The running joke in the wine industry is it takes a lot of beer to make good wine. I do have a passion for all three categories, and I can explain how. Because not only do we make wine, but we have worked with another local beer manufacturer to make a beer that is made using our barrels. And we also work with a distiller who turns our spent grapes into grappa. So we're always looking to work with collaborative, measures. So, but that's been my job, is to follow these trends. I've been involved with a number of mixologists, etc. So I still continue to find anything with fermentation and distilling, and absolutely fascinating things. And what's really interesting is that it's worked its way back to us in that not only did I do those products, but we make our own sherry. We have our own Solera. We offer 10-year-old sherry to our consumers. And what we do, because of what I was reading about the way they were finishing whiskey in sherry and port barrels, we took our sherry and we aged it in whiskey barrels. And we did something completely new and different that hasn't been done in the industry before. And so it's always a way of learning and then taking that material and that knowledge and using it in another and different way. But, finding out more and more about what's going on in the industry is a lot of fun.
Well, it seems like that in this way of experimenting, you're providing new experiences for the consumer. And I'm just curious, where do you draw your inspirations from?
Well, I have to tell you, the more I find out about what other people are doing in beer or wine or I don't want to say liquor, because I've been focusing on whiskey, the more I talk to people, the more I see what they're doing. And when you go to some place like Woodford Reserve, for example, Woodford Reserve is the Augusta of distillers. It looks like a country club, and you keep searching for the golf course because it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And the distilling area looks like something out of Harry Potter. It's just all the numbers are still kept in big old ledgers with incredibly neat handwriting. It's an amazing experience, and I think that I was talking to Kevin Zraly, who wrote the Windows on the World wine book, and I said, what do you think the difference is in winemaking? There seems to be so much better wine these days. And he said, I'll tell you the same thing that I've been told, is it's communication. It's 100 years ago, 50 years ago, the guys who made wine in Burgundy didn't talk to the guys who made wine in Bordeaux. It didn't happen. They didn't trade secrets. They didn't give each other the tips that are now exchanged as part of an industry understanding. And that's absolutely true. One of the things that I found when I got to the wine business is that it's still agriculturally based. So in the middle of harvest, I might get a call and say, hey, my crusher December bus broke down. Can I borrow yours for a day? Or do you have any, I'm out of yeast. I can't get any for the next 24 hours. Do you have any yeast I can borrow? Do you have a piece of equipment, et cetera? And so there's a much more of a camaraderie, even though there is competition, don't get me wrong. There's much more of a camaraderie than you might find in other industries. And so I think that's also another great thing that has happened that didn't used to always be.
So folks who are listening to this, they may want to know, so what am I going to look for if I want to buy a good whiskey?
Wow. All right. So it depends on what you're looking for. For example, if you're looking at single malts, some people are going to like a Highland style, which is slightly sweeter. It's got notes of honey and orange peel. And if you like something smoky, that's got that sort of a little bit of a campfire to it, you're going to gravitate more to something like a Lagavulin or Lafroig. There's a thing called Big Pete, a Pete Monster. These are all smokier brands. On the other side, I always, in the bourbon and rye world, there are three distinct styles that are appealing. One would be a wheated whiskey. A wheated whiskey has much more dominated by caramel and vanilla. Something with a lot of higher rye content. Rye is sort of the gingerbread or the ginger snap of the distilling world, and that leaves with a little bit more of a pepper finish, something that gives you a little bite at the end of your whiskey sometimes that you feel. And then of course there's rye, and then rye has a bigger bite to it. And again, you get a little bit more of that ginger snap than you might in a bourbon. So those are some of the different flavor profiles, and that's what I try to work off of. If somebody asks me what kind of wine or spirit they should drink, those are the kinds of things that I would say. So the other thing that I think is going to be huge that you'll start to see, speaking of trends, you're going to start to see a lot more Tennessee whiskey as a category over the next 5 years. With the explosion of distilling in Tennessee, Tennessee whiskey is a style, and that's what they're really starting to push or educate people on. Tennessee whiskey is made in the main like bourbon, but it's passed through a charcoal filter before it's put into a barrel, which softens and smooths out the whiskey before it goes into a barrel. It's a little less rough, almost like Irish whiskey is triple distilled as opposed to double distilled. And so Tennessee whiskey is kind of like a half step to that in a number of ways. But Tennessee whiskey is going to become more and more a category over the next 5 years, and that'll be one of the bigger category trends that I think you'll be seeing in the next 5 years.
So what's the key takeaway you want people to get from your book, Big Whiskey?
Oh, well, Big Whiskey is, it's about the world, about the North America's biggest whiskey region. We have all the distilleries in Kentucky and Tennessee are represented inside the book. It's all about how it happens, interviews with all the major players. We have interviews with more than a dozen master distillers. We have profiles, like I said, of the Johnson family, who, for example, at Buffalo Trace, I don't think anybody but a Johnson has ever rolled out the millionth barrel, and they're now up to, I guess, 7 or 8 million barrels or 9 million barrels, somewhere up there. And a Johnson family member has always rolled out that millionth barrel. There's some wonderful stories. Nearest Green coming up with the recipe for Jack Daniels. There's a great distiller in Memphis, a young lady who's doing fantastic things out there. There's just so much going on in the region, and the tourism is building and building, and there's not a book that really encapsulates that entire two-state region like what we attempted to do. And I did it with the photographer, John Whalen. We spent about a month crisscrossing Tennessee and Kentucky, sometimes visiting 4 distilleries a day. I know that sounds exciting, but I can assure you in the middle of summer, it's not something you really want to attempt for a month and change. It's a great way to ruin your health. But it was fascinating. It was an incredible learning experience. There's tons of really great whiskey. There's a great little place, for example, called Hartfield. They're in Paris, Kentucky, and they are in an old renovated grain house, and they are making small batch bourbon that'll just completely knock your socks off. So there's so many great little stories. For example, in Tennessee, Nelson Greenbrier, 2 young men in their late 20s, early 30s, found out that they were related to one of the oldest labels in the history of whiskey making. They spent their own dollars proving heredity, not only to the label, but to the license. They were actually able to reinstate one of the first 10 licenses in the United States. And then they auctioned off that for investment, and all the big boys, Diageo and Beam, et cetera, participated. And I think eventually Constellation Brand was the one who won out. And so they built a huge, $6 million distillery with these 2 young men, resurrecting a label that hasn't seen the light of day in more than 100 years. So there's some wonderful, wonderful stories, great stories about moonshiners who finally come out of the woods and opened up distilleries. There's just so much going on in the industry. It's exploding, and there are more than 80 or 90 distilleries to go visit. So it's a fun romp through all that, but it's also all the exciting things that are going on in the whiskey, the way they're finishing their whiskeys, the way they're making their whiskeys. People have introduced things like chocolate malt, which add a really big, luxurious flavor to bourbon. So it's just been an amazing explosion in all of it.
Well, Carlo, it's clear that you're a great storyteller, for sure. I guess I have time for one last question, at least I hope so. What's on the horizon for you, and have either of your sons become interested in doing the kind of work that you do?
One son definitely not, although he has become a salesman. I don't know, maybe eventually he'll sell whiskey or wine, I'm not sure. The other son has gone on to become a chef, and he is a working chef, and he really enjoys it. He's just getting ready to graduate from school, and he did an internship down at Disney, so that was kind of fun and exciting and a great learning experience for him. Me, I'm just keeping on. It's been a huge exciting thrill to work on big whiskey. I've met a lot of great people, probably heading back down to the region. I've been asked by a number of the distilleries and bookstores to come down and do a little bit of a tour, so I'm very excited about that. But really just watching this industry continue to grow. What's going on in Kentucky and Tennessee has no parallel in the United States right now. It's what they're going through is what Napa and Sonoma went through 20 years ago or 30 years ago. You're seeing a region that has been solid but not explosive suddenly just blossom in a huge way. And that's still the most exciting part about what's going on, and watching some of these new small craft distillers make their strides and hit their strides is an exciting thing. And you're seeing a lot of good people. And the nice thing about these are jobs that can't be exported to India or Mexico or somewhere else. It's made in America. You got to go there to buy it. You got to go there to see it. And you're seeing a lot of good places find all kinds of revivals because of what's going on.
Fantastic. Well, I know we're out of time. I've really enjoyed talking with you and hearing your story and hearing the stories that you tell. Don? Again, the name of the book is Big Whiskey.
It's available at Barnes & Noble. It's available at all good independent bookstores. A shout out to her bookstore in Nashville that was very nice to us. It's available at many of the distilleries, and of course it's available on Amazon.com. So we're very proud of that. And John Whalen, who is the photographer, and I traveled around a month and a half. We have all kinds of great photography and stories that nobody else will have in their books. And so it's a great one-volume take on America's premier distilling region. Google my name, or you can email the winery, Hudson Chatham Winery in Ghent, New York, and they can reach me there as well. Carlo, Carlo Devito, DE, capital V as in Victor, ITO, and unfortunately I'm not related to Danny DeVito, but there you go.
Okay. Thank you, Carlo, so much for being with us today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you both for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Loved it.
We have been talking with Carlo Devito about his new book, Big Whiskey. A link to his website will be on foodandwineinsider.com tonight, where you can hear this and every other Food and Wine Insider program. You can also tell us what you'd like to hear or have discussed on future shows by taking our short survey.
To be successful, most restaurant owners require extra capital from time to time. When you need funding to renovate, buy equipment, or manage cash flow, you don't have time to track down financial statements or wait weeks for a decision. That's where Cabbage can help. Cabbage gives small businesses access to a line of credit of up to $200,000. Apply online and you'll get a decision right away. Since Cabbage is a line of credit, you can take the exact amount you need. You never have to reapply to take additional loans, and you'll only pay for the funds you use. Cabbage has helped more than 230,000 businesses from every industry, and with $4 billion in funding, Cabbage is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau and was named the Forbes Top 100 Companies twice in a row. Check out Cabbage at cabbageWithAK.com/foodandwine, and you'll get a $50 gift card when you qualify. That's KABBAGE.com/foodandwine.
Line of credit is subject to credit approval. See terms and conditions. All Cabbage business loans are issued by Celtic Bank, a Utah-chartered industrial bank, member FDIC.
And Manischewitz has been a part of the American food scene for generations. They're expanding and they're changing some of the things they're doing. Here to talk about some of these changes and some of the expansion of Manischewitz into the seasoned brand line is Lance Reiter. He is Senior Director of Sales and New Business Development. Lance, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be with you today.
Did I make the distinction clear enough?
Yes.
Okay. With that, and without further ado, Anne will continue the program because I've got a very bad cold.
Okay.
Well, good morning, Lance, and welcome. For those who may not know, the Manischewitz Company was actually founded in 1888 in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's now in Newark, New Jersey. It's owned by Bain Capital, and it's really best known for matzo and kosher wine. Lance, tell our listeners a little bit about your background and what you were doing before you joined Manischewitz.
Sure. Prior to joining Manischewitz, I was running the retail division at Roland Foods, which is a large specialty food company that had 1,500 products across 20 different categories. So I'm very well-versed in the space, as you would say.
And what attracted you to come to Manischewitz?
The opportunity to continue the mainstreaming of their canned fish line, the Season brand, which dates back over 90 years and is very on trend, and the commitment to all the call-outs and all the food transparency going on and the new opportunities that canned fish brings with it today as a result.
It appears you came at a really pivotal time in 2014 after the acquisition by the Sancati Group of Bain Capital and before the new president, David Sugarman, was announced in April of 2015. Talk a little bit about the challenges the company faced at this point in time.
The biggest challenge with the Season brand, while there's great opportunity, has simply been because we've really started out as strictly a kosher line. In certain parts of the country, you can still find the product in the kosher section. We're fighting very hard and have been very successful in many places, and it continues the trend of moving the product out of kosher into the canned fish section. And for the very simple reason is that canned fish can be found in every single store in the United States, where unfortunately there is not a kosher section in every store. So we want to make the product available for every possible consumer. And with that, we continue to really forge ahead and try to make that switch. And as I said, we have been very successful, and we continue that, weekly, literally.
I've read that, and this has been over some time now, that Manischewitz is obviously very keen to hold on to its heritage and its kosher roots, and yet bring itself into the mainstream. Presumably, this is what it's doing with the Season brand. Can you talk about the differences in the products?
Absolutely. The Season brand really encompasses over 40 different types of canned fish, ranging from sardines to anchovies to salmon, tuna, mackerel, caviar, and kippers. And we have been committed to the whole food transparency, which is one of the most important components with food today. And when you talk about seafood, it's even more important. And what I mean about the food transparency is our products, we have really put our money where our mouth is, as all our products are non-GMO project verified. We're certified sustainable. We have no BPA in the liners. We're certified gluten-free. And we take great pride in advertising all those call-outs on our packaging so consumers can see that as a brand, we're delivering that transparency that they seek today.
So do you also have comparable products under the Manischewitz brand, or is this just a totally new brand that you're trying to bring to the mainstream consumer, and yet have all of that great heritage and, as you say, transparency and the clarity in the labeling and all of that to the product lines?
The Season brand, like Manischewitz, has a great history and heritage. It dates back over 90 years. And as it was born and exploded, glued to the hip, so to speak, with Manischewitz, as we started to really go mainstream over the last 5 or 10 years, so the product can be found in grocery stores, mass merchandisers, club stores, Whole Foods, the natural food stores. So we're getting the product into all these different segments and thereby making the product available to consumers across all classes of trade, which are very, important. And the way you continue to do that is make sure to get the product whenever humanly possible into that canned fish section, so we can reach as many consumers as possible.
And how big is the canned fish section in a store? And, about what kind of share do you currently have in that segment?
Typically, the canned fish sections across the country on average run anywhere from 4 to 8 feet. And within that, it's a very mixed bag as far as certain retailers that only do a 4-foot section. Obviously, you're fighting for limited space. And then when you have the 8-foot section, it opens it up a little bit more. But just to give you a couple examples, those consumers that might be in the Metro New York area, for example, at ShopRite, we average over 25 items in the canned fish section. And if you go to someone like Stop and Shop, which goes from New England down to Mid-Atlantic, we average also 20 some odd season items in the canned fish section. And then around the country, you'll find, various distribution as well. So our products can also be found even on Amazon, which is as another option besides the other classes of trade that I mentioned previously. So we're really trying to make the product available in all possible channels. So regardless of how you shop for your canned fish, hopefully you'll be able to see our brand, and you'll have options available to you.
So if I wanted to get a sense of how big, when you say big, you were talking about space. I was trying to get a sense of, from a revenue standpoint, how big is the canned fish segment in a store? How important, how important is it to the retailer?
It's very important. The biggest driver within the category is tuna. If anyone that's standing in front of the canned fish section will see that tuna always dominates the largest amount of space. But beyond the tuna, when you start getting into sardines, sardines are growing, meaning that they're getting more and more space, because as you look at the subcategories of that canned fish section, often today sardines will outpace the other items in the section as far as growth. And some of the drivers of that, they're on trend. They were one of the top 10 food trends last year. They tie in beautifully to the paleo way of eating. They are very rich in minerals, vitamins, omegas. They really are a superfood, and it's portable protein. It's really like the perfect food. And what we're also finding is some of the newer users are actually millennials who are seeking, healthier ways of eating, convenience. And when you have portable protein such as our sardines, it makes it that much easier. In fact, we really have prided ourselves on being innovative within the space. And one of the things we did as a first amongst all brands is we came out with an easy peel foil. So a consumer no longer has to, decades ago, you would have to use a key to twist to open up the can, and then you went to a flip lid. Now with this easy peel foil, it makes it very easy for opening.
Right. And again, back to, do you have a sense of how big the category is from a revenue standpoint when you think about the category of canned fish?
It literally is, tens or $100 million plus, for the simple fact that tuna, as I said, is the biggest growth there. But sardines, while a lot smaller from a dollar perspective, that's where some of the biggest growth within the section. So what you're seeing is, as a result, when retailers look at the space and they look at the dollars, tuna will always maintain a good share of it, but sardines are gaining more and more space, which is why when I mentioned earlier that you go into a key retailer like ShopRite and you just on our brand, and we dominate the majority of the sardine space, we have over 20 different products in their section. So that tells you that we're generating, dollars for them. And depending on the commitment of the retailer and even where the retailer is in the country, that always helps determine the space that's allocated. But the category itself is a key one. It's a large one. The volume is very high, and therefore it's always top of mind with retailers looking to maximize where they allocate the space and to what brand.
Yeah, I have to say, I was surprised when you said the section was only somewhere between 4 and 8 feet. It doesn't give you a lot of space to work with when you mentioned earlier, you have 40 different types of products. Do you find there's a seasonality? How do you manage trying to be sure that you maintain that shelf space?
Well, with shelf space, one of the key drivers is always trying to have your product priced right. In addition, having strong promotional support throughout the year, and then tying in key periods. So, for example, with our sardines, we would do promotions throughout the year, but also always targeting in whether it be Lent or Jewish holidays where sardines are eaten. So typically the average grocery store would have our product on some type of promotion 3 to 4 times a year, thereby giving the consumers a chance to, buy our product at a reduced price.
And is there a seasonality to canned fish?
Not so much. You get a little lift during those Jewish holidays I mentioned and Lent, but it really is somewhat uniform throughout the country, or throughout the year rather, simply because this is an everyday eating item. Some people will eat sardines. In fact, myself, I usually have sardines for lunch 2 or 3 days a week, and that's not uncommon. In fact, people that might go into a club store will see we sell our number one item, which is a skinless and boneless sardine in olive oil, and it's in a 6-pack. And it's not uncommon to see people that will buy multiples of these, so they always will have the product in their pantry, available.
John, do you have a question for Lance?
I do. I'm listening. Sorry about that. You get to listening to the two of you talk who are so knowledgeable in this area. I myself love not so much sardines as anchovies. And just this past Sunday, I saw Lydia on TV making anchovies and spaghetti. It was absolutely a fabulous dish. But I guess my question, do you have products like anchovy paste? And if so, what do people use it for?
We do not have anchovy paste, but anchovy paste would typically be used in the making of Caesar dressing, for example. One of the items I'd like to mention that we're very excited about here at Season are our new savories. We just started launching this exciting new product line. It's total innovation. And as a result, we created this new on-the-go, grab-and-go package where we've taken skinless and boneless sardines, we've tumbled it with various herbs and veggies and created 3 great varieties, one being lemon veggie, Mediterranean, and sweet and spicy. And what makes this product unique is there's never been a sardine salad like this. And then in the box, self-contained, we have a fold-up spoon, an easy peel foil, and 6 organic brown rice crackers. And it makes for a very simple, on-the-go, portable protein superfood snack and or meal. And this product line only started shipping a number of months ago, and we're launching it nationwide. Currently, it's on the shelves at Stop & Shop, ShopRite. It's rolling out to Wegmans shortly. It's on the shelf at King's. We just shipped 450 Kroger stores throughout the Midwest. It's in Central Market stores in Texas and also Cost Plus World Market stores nationally. In fact, you might even see the product if you're going through the airport, as we did a rotation with the Hudson News airport locations. So it's a very exciting line for us that that is literally in its infancy right now.
Well, Lance, you jumped my line, because I was about next to tell you that your people sent me some samples of it, and I'm not a sardine eater by nature, but I have to tell you, it was out of this world. I was surprised, and my wife was as well. We took them on a walk to Palisades Interstate Parkway forest, and we ate them on the top of a mountain. And I can only tell you, you're so right about the product. What I was doing, we kept the packaging so I could talk about it on the show, but I couldn't agree with you more. With that note, and I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you. I happen to love sardines, so Don, you can send those over to me. You know, you're talking about your of course they're gone. You know, it was interesting. You were talking about a product that is really convenience-oriented, healthy, kind of a grab and go. Have you looked at the convenience channel itself in terms of distribution? I'm just curious. In terms of these products, seem to be perfect for the convenience store channel.
Yes, and in fact, we've already shown the product to 7-Eleven, who has shown some interest in testing it. And, you know, we utilize brokers to help our sales efforts at different spots around the country. And we're even currently working with a broker whose specialty is convenience stores. So the product is getting shown, and hopefully in the not too distant future, you know, we'll be rolling out to some of these folks. Similar to the Hudson News airport type locations in the airports where we've got that rotation that I mentioned, you know, kind of like a convenience store in the airport. And they recognize that as well, which is why we were able to get that.
You know, I always feel that in sales, you know, you're at the front line of seeing where the trends are and what the opportunities are. How do you work with the R&D group in terms of developing new products?
Well, the most important thing always is that you want to develop a product and the packaging that goes with it that ties into what's on trend, what's hot, what's exciting. You know, basically the product has to have a reason to be. So when you're talking about sardines, first and foremost, it is one of the top trends going on because of all the things I mentioned earlier in the conversation. But then when you tie it into the whole grab and go, the convenience aspect, so you're marrying all these hot aspects, superfood, convenience, grab and go, self-contained, portable protein, superfood, it makes for a perfect package. Those are the kinds of components that you always want to look for when developing a product and its packaging, because it's very, as you know, I mentioned the words on trend a number of times, that it has to be relative, because when you go to see a buyer, they see too many Me Too products day in and day out. But if you have a point of differentiation, that's a game changer.
No, that's you mentioned about your products being non-GMO and gluten-free, and yet kosher, I have found, is also still very, very relevant in terms of what it means to even mainstream consumers. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your company knows about what kosher means to the mainstream consumer?
Well, you know, kosher to the mainstream consumer is kind of like the Good Housekeeping seal. You know, they know it's being manufactured to certain standards, and as a result, it has that built-in added level of, you know, confidence that a consumer has in the product. And we all know by, you know, what's happening within the kosher market as far as growth, and the fact that many mainstream type products, whenever possible, do try to make the product kosher. so they can, appeal to as many consumers as possible. So we're very obviously proud of that component as well as the others, because it delivers on so many different fronts. The kosher consumer, in fact, when they're looking for shopping for their products, Manischewitz as a company has such a wide range of products that we literally usually have something for everybody. And the sardines, the season brand, is a piece of that. And during all those call outs that we've spoken about, and it really does make for a perfect food.
You also handle new business development. I would love for you to tell our listeners what's been your proudest moment to date in the whole area of new business development.
I would say it's hard to focus in on just one thing, but it's really the combination of the conversion of our products from the kosher section to the fish section in a number of grocery retailers, combined with the fact that we've opened up new classes of trade. One of the accounts that I mentioned where savories, for example, can be found is Cost Plus World Markets. Our brand, season brand, was never on the shelf, and for those that might not be familiar with it, is a national chain. It's kind of like a Pier 1 Imports with gourmet food. Well, now you can go in there, and in all their stores nationally, you will see savories on the shelf, and now we'll be adding more items as we go. So you have classes of trade, you have conversion from the kosher, to the canned fish. We're a very strong player in the club channel, the mass merchandisers, natural food. So it's really working all these elements. That's why it's very hard to hone in on just one. It's really a combination of things.
You talked a little bit earlier about online sales. What are you seeing as the growth in the whole area of online sales, and where do you think it's going to go for your company in terms of its percentage of your sales?
There's no doubt that online sales continues to grow. Bricks and mortar is still by far the largest, even with the likes of Amazon. Do I think online will replace bricks and mortar? I don't personally, but it's a relative component of the sales pie. So whether you're the supplier, a retailer, you have to be cognizant of playing to that online option, because those consumers that are looking to shop either strictly buy online or as a part of where they shop, your brands need to be represented. So right now in that space, if you were to go on Amazon, for example, which is by far the largest within the online space, and you put in seasoned products, the consumer has many options for purchasing various products there.
Lance, I just realized we've run out of time because this has been such a fascinating discussion. But I want to be sure that Don gets your information out to our listeners. So, Don, I'm going to switch it over to you.
Well, first off, Lance, you got to send some samples out to Anne of your new product. If I liked it, she's going to love it. Okay.
Done.
We're talking with Lance Reiter. He is Senior Director of Sales and New Business Development for Seasons Products, which is part of Manischewitz Foods. Lance, how do people reach you and your products?
Sure. I can be reached. Email would be best. It's simply Lance, LANCE .Reiter, REITER, at seasonproducts.com.
And does Season have its own website?
Yes, it does. It's simply seasonproducts.com is our website, and you can learn a lot more detail. It's a very user-friendly site, and I encourage your listeners to go and check out the various information. We have recipes, questions and answers on it. They can learn a lot more.
I think Ann would agree with me. We could spend another half hour talking with you. You're so knowledgeable. Don't you agree, Ann?
Yes, thank you so much. Not only educational, but really fantastic to learn about the products and for our listeners to hear about them as well.
I appreciate the time, and thanks again for having me today.
Food and Wine Insider.